Seeing this as the perfect opportunity, Lu Sheng decided to stick around and toy with them. Soon, his avatar appeared in front of them, floating ominously in the air, making the two wonder if they'd stumbled upon a mythological figure from legend. Picking up where we left off, they quickly shook off their initial shock. Sure, the sight was surreal, but they didn't have the luxury to freak out. One of them turned to the other, saying there was no need to be spooked since those things don't exist. They knew this guy was strong, but if they attacked together, they might at least manage to escape, even if they couldn't win. The woman nodded, regaining her composure. They were, after all, 2 of the top 10 demons. How could they lose to someone who wasn't even at the level of a martial saint? Pooling their strength, they charged at Lu Sheng. In response, he simply watched them calmly, as if they were nothing but trash. He was mildly amused to see they even had some combo attacks up their sleeve. The woman took a deep breath and launched a massive fireball, while her werewolf partner lunged forward, dashing toward Lu Sheng. Seeing this, he sighed and shook his head. Both their strength and their techniques were just disappointing. With a gentle puff, he not only extinguished the fireball, but also sent the werewolf flying backward. The werewolf steadied himself, sweat trickling down his forehead. He couldn't believe it. He knew his partner's flames were powerful. How could a single breath blow them away like that? Then, to his horror, he realized he couldn't move. He was frozen in place by some kind of psychic force. His eyes went wide as he stared at Lu Sheng, stammering. How can you have such strong psychic power? Lu Sheng shook his head and replied, "This isn't just psychic power, it's divine power." The werewolf's body began to contort, bending at unnatural angles as though he were being twisted into a ball. He let out a painful scream. Watching this terrifying sight, his partner immediately turned and bolted. To her, maybe Lu Sheng was the real demon here. There was no way she could beat him. Her only option was to run for her life. But just as she took her first step, she heard a calm yet chilling voice beside her saying, "Don't panic, he's not a demon." She turned slowly, only to find the golden figure standing directly in front of her. He was about to treat her to something special. Meanwhile, on the speeding train, the girl paced anxiously, scanning every corner for Lu Sheng. Where had he gone, and why hadn't he come back yet? They were nearing their destination, and she wondered if their mission was really just over like that. Just then, she heard a familiar voice beside her. Turning, she was surprised and relieved to see Lu Sheng grinning at her. She asked, almost in disbelief, where he had gone. He replied casually, saying he had just finished a little sewing project while holding up a bundle of thick rope. She blinked, obviously not understanding. But Lu Sheng only smiled back, offering no further explanation. Elsewhere, those 2 top 10 demons were tightly bound to a steel pole right in the middle of the railway tracks. They tugged and strained, but their combined strength couldn't break free. With horror, they realized the ropes were crafted from rare mithril gold, making them unbreakable. Then, one of them looked up and froze in fear. 2 high-speed trains were approaching from opposite directions, each engine linked to the ropes binding them. Back on the train, Lu Sheng checked his watch and decided it was time. He raised one hand slightly, activating his psychic energy. The 2 demons felt the ropes tighten around them, pulling them in opposite directions. As the trains sped up, the tension grew until with one final pull, their bodies were torn apart by the force. Guess that's a modern take on the ancient pull-apart punishment. But this wasn't just about victory. It was about sending a message to anyone who dared to go after him. Just then, the officer approached him, reporting some unknown popping sounds. For his safety, she suggested calling in a helicopter to take him directly to the capital instead of staying on the train. Lu Sheng shook his head with a smile, instructing her instead to have someone clean up the tracks they had just passed. She nodded, uncertain about what was going on but determined to follow his orders. Meanwhile, back at the Dark Demon Society's temporary base, a man stared at a monitor. Horror struck. Another 2 of their top 10 demons' life signals had vanished, 3 in one day. He and his companion both trembled, whispering in disbelief. The top 10 demons were supposed to be godlike figures, each wielding incredible beast powers that made them feared worldwide. But now, 3 were dead in a single day. Could a martial saint have intervened? The woman beside him shook her head. She doubted that the 3 martial saints would have any special interest in their target. And the military didn't have anyone of that level, biting her lip. She finally concluded that they might have underestimated their target's power. He wasn't just at a top general's level. He was more likely on par with a marshal. The man could hardly believe what he was hearing. Was someone like this even possible? A top-tier great-grandmaster under 20, potentially with the power of a marshal. How were they supposed to handle this? Losing 3 top demons was too high a price. No payoff could justify such a setback. Should they just cut their losses and retreat? He was visibly shaken, but the woman beside him stayed remarkably calm. She agreed they needed to cut their losses, but retreat wasn't the answer. They had to finish the mission. After all, they'd been hunting this target relentlessly, and there was no way he wouldn't hold a grudge. If they let him keep growing, wouldn't he eventually come back for revenge? The man asked if they should immediately contact the organization for backup. But the woman shook her head. They still had the 4th-ranked demon, Lady Samajina. With her strength, she was confident they could kill the target. But the man pointed out a major issue. They had no direct contact with Lady Samajina. The organization hadn't provided that information. Suddenly, the woman dropped to her knees, clasping her hands in fervent prayer. She said they didn't need contact information. Samajina was always with them. The man watched, utterly confused. Then, without warning, she cried out, invoking the 4th demon, Lady Samajina, to descend. What happened next was horrifying. A hand emerged from the woman's mouth. The man scrambled back, completely shocked, but it only got worse. A woman began crawling out of the woman's mouth, stretching until the force burst the woman's head like a balloon. Now, standing naked before him, Samajina's cold gaze fell on the terrified man. She ordered him to provide the target's coordinates, showing no emotion and not even glancing at the sacrificed corpse behind her. Lu Sheng wiped the blood from his hands. Another Dark Demon Society member is down. He'd lost count of how many he'd taken out by now, but fodder was still fodder, no matter how many they sent. Glancing at the communication device from his latest guest, he guessed it probably had a tracking feature. If he kept it on him, the Dark Demon Society should be able to locate him. He was curious how many of them were brave, or perhaps foolish enough to keep coming. But by sunrise tomorrow, he'd be done playing around. At his current speed, he could reach the capital within a few hours, faster than a plane. However, his real goal was to get rid of Lai and Su, and he needed to stay in top shape in case anything unexpected happened. Plus, he figured he'd give the Dark Demon Society a fair chance to catch up. After all, he didn't want them to fall too far behind. As he turned to leave, a thought struck him. Killing Lai and Su wouldn't have too many consequences, but as the wife of a Jadao martial saint, he needed to ensure it didn't lead back to him, an alibi. Now that could work. Maybe he'd create some chaos elsewhere at the exact time of her death. With a plan forming, he took out his phone and dialed a number. On the other end, a surprised voice answered none other than Healing Su, our boy's future waifu too. Lu Sheng casually asked her when the Chen family's birthday banquet was scheduled. She replied it was tomorrow evening, sounding curious and wanting to know why he was asking. Lu Sheng chuckled, saying he was just looking out for her. He already knew how these family banquets usually went. He assumed there was always some jerk trying to make trouble for anyone who wasn't fully accepted in the family, like her, for example. And he didn't want anyone bullying her. After a pause, he added with a smirk, "Come to think of it, she's practically the perfect main character template for a romance novel. Unaccepted by the family, standing tall despite it all, the whole thing." On the other hand, Ling Su didn't know how to respond. She told him there was no need for all that. She was practically invisible at Chen family events, so no one would bother her. But Lu Sheng, already set on his perfect plan, told her it was decided. She just needed to send him the address, and he'd be there on time tomorrow night to back her up. With that, he hung up. Ling Su stared at her phone, a bit dazed, wondering what exactly Lu Sheng was planning this time. Meanwhile, Lu Sheng pocketed his phone with a satisfied grin. Perfect. His plan was flawless. Take down Lai and Su, then show up at the Chen family banquet and stir up some chaos. Whether or not Ling Su needed his help was beside the point. If he said he was going to have her back, she'd just have to go along with it. Simple as that. Hours passed, and the sun had fully set. In a dark forest clearing, a young couple was cozied up just outside their tent, gazing at the sky. Despite her thick jacket, the girl shivered and hugged herself. She pouted, asking the boy if he was messing with her. She couldn't see a single star. How was she supposed to believe there'd be a meteor shower? The boy, rubbing his cold nose, assured her he'd checked the forecast. It was supposed to be a once-in-a-millennium Pegasus meteor shower. In truth, he'd exaggerated to get her out there for a cozy night alone. He took the chance to suggest they warm up inside the tent. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded, and he began wrapping an arm around her shoulders. But just then, the girl gasped and looked up, saying there's actually a shooting star, a golden one too. The boy looked up, equally shocked to see a golden streak cutting across the sky, which he hadn't expected at all. The show wasn't over. A second light appeared in the sky, this time a streak of red, heading straight for the golden one. They collided, and an explosion lit up the night. The boy hurriedly pulled out his telescope, his jaw dropping. 2 meteors colliding? That was anything but normal. As he looked closer, he noticed something even more unbelievable. There were people inside. On the other side, Lu Sheng landed gracefully, brushing the dust off his clothes and chuckling to himself. Who would have thought he'd get knocked to the ground one day? He looked ahead, intrigued by the swirling red vortex nearby. Looked like the Dark Demon Society had finally sent someone worthwhile. Emerging from the whirlwind was a woman who wasted no time, charging straight at him. As she dashed over, her after images appeared, surrounding Lu Sheng from all directions. In response, Lu Sheng's will projection countered her attack effortlessly. After a brief exchange, he looked at her with satisfaction and said, "Not bad." Lu Sheng knew that advancing from an 8th-level Great Grandmaster to a 9th-level Martial Saint required a seamless fusion of mind, body, and spirit. Harnessing universal energy to construct a martial avatar, he sensed that this woman was close, just one final step away. Samajina's eyes gleamed as she observed Lu Sheng's calm demeanor. "No wonder so many have died at your hands," she said, her voice soft but edged with danger. Acknowledging his strength, she took a step toward him. But Lu Sheng, relaxed and almost dismissive, replied, "If that's all you've got, this might be a waste of my time tonight." Instead of being provoked, she smiled with a wicked glint in her eyes, asking our boy if that's all he's got. While licking her lips, she continued saying, then he wouldn't get the chance to say that again. Suddenly, a surge of immense energy erupted from her, enveloping the area. Leaning forward, she told Lu Sheng he should feel honored, as he was the first in 5 years to witness her ultimate form. Under the moonlight, her transformation began. A single horn emerged from her head, and her lower body morphed into that of a horse. Odd as it looked, Lu Sheng could feel her power skyrocketing. Though he didn't seem particularly impressed, in the next instant she vanished. For a split second, Lu Sheng blinked. She was fast enough to actually catch him off guard. Before he knew it, her powerful kick sent him flying. And before he could recover, she reappeared above him, slamming both hands down with incredible force. She didn't stop there. A blast of energy erupted from her mouth, causing the ground to explode beneath them, and leaving a massive crater over 100 meters wide. Energy waves rippled outward, and a cloud of dust billowed into the night. "It's over," she murmured, her face calm as she surveyed the devastation below, almost as if she had anticipated this outcome from the start. Then a faint rustling sound emerged from the ground. Lu Sheng's voice broke through the silence, sounding almost disappointed with her transformation. He asked if her ultimate form merely allowed her to slightly increase the ceiling of a great grandmaster. She turned, looking startled, only to see him emerge from the crater completely unscathed, dusting himself off. She pointed out that she hadn't even reached that level yet. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. She said, "But Lu Sheng is just a great grandmaster too. How can he be unharmed after taking her full power attack? Who exactly is he?" As the dust settled, Lu Sheng's low voice cut through the night, saying he is someone on the verge of reaching the peak of martial arts. And as for her, she's no longer worth his time. In the next second, a terrifying aura erupted from within him, gathering all his strength into his fist. Hello guys, welcome back in SL Manhwa. Let's continue. As Lu Sheng's body radiated a dark, ominous energy, a cold mist began to fill the air. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Sam and Kina, assessing them with a calm yet unsettling intensity. "You have nothing left to offer," he murmured, his voice echoing through the mist. Sam and Kina shared a fearful glance. From their perspective, Lu Sheng was not the man they once knew. He was something far more dangerous. Kina swallowed. Her nerves tore as she attempted to stand her ground. But before she could react, Lu Sheng's hand shot forward, crackling with restrained power. He stopped just short of grabbing her, instead releasing a surge of mental force that sent a chill down her spine. His power hung in the air, suffocating and cold, binding her in place. Kina's body began to tremble as she struggled to break free of the invisible hold. But this time, Lu Sheng didn't strike. Instead, he loosened his grip and stepped back, watching her with a bitter smile. "Run if you think you can escape," he taunted. Sam seized the moment, lunging forward to pull Kina away. Together, they stumbled back, and just as they were about to retreat into the darkness, Lu Sheng's hand rose again, releasing a wave of energy that lit up the sky with a blinding brilliance. The shockwave sent them sprawling, but when they looked up, they saw only his silhouette disappearing into the shadows. Meanwhile, back at Lianshu's villa, the news of Lu Sheng's survival and Sam and Kina's near escape came as a bitter blow. Furious, Lianshu clenched her fists, her calm exterior shattering. "How could they fail me again?" She seethed, her anger palpable. Plans and contingencies raced through her mind as she prepared for her next move, realizing that Lu Sheng's resolve was stronger than ever. Back in the misty night, Lu Sheng looked up at a golden stairway that appeared in the sky, a mysterious path leading to greater power. As he ascended, his mind was filled with questions and determination. His journey was just beginning, and he knew that, compared to the true warriors of his world, he was still far from his peak. Yet, his spirit burned with an intensity that would guide him forward, pushing the limits of his strength. With a furious glare, Lianshu slammed her fists on the table. She had invested a considerable amount in this high-stakes operation by hiring the Black Magic Society, and the failure was unacceptable. On the table, a tablet displayed a live video call with a suited man who appeared slightly rattled by her outburst. "Please, calm down," he said cautiously, apologizing for the mission's failure. He explained that they had suffered significant losses, with her target eliminating 4 high-ranking demon pillars, something they hadn't foreseen. Lianshu's anger simmered, but the shock in her eyes betrayed her fear. This was the first time she felt their control slipping, and it filled her with unease. Blaming the society's weakness, she grasped the tablet tightly, unwilling to let this setback deter her. Her expression hardened as she demanded that they finish what they started and eliminate Lu Sheng entirely. "Surely, you don't expect me to believe the Great Black Magic Society is incapable of dealing with a mere level 8 opponent," she sneered. The man on the screen remained composed and suggested that one of the society's demonic gods could easily handle the situation. His calm tone suggested experience, but he raised 2 fingers and added, "But it'll cost you 20 times more." Lianshu's initial anger turned to confusion. He explained that sending any of the 3 demonic gods into the Dragon Realm would spark international outrage, potentially drawing the attention of 9th-level martial saints. These actions, he reminded her, were not trivial, and the society was risking much by aiding her, mainly to honor an old favor owed to her late husband. This struck a nerve with Lianshu, who scowled at the screen. In a fit of rage, she threw the tablet across the room, cracking its screen but not breaking the connection. Despite the shattered screen, the man remained on the call and stated that, given the substantial losses her actions had caused them, the Black Magic Society would require compensation. Details of the amount, he said, would follow in an email. Overcome with fury, Lianshu stomped on the tablet, shattering it completely. She muttered to herself in frustration, unwilling to believe that the society would demand such reparations after their own failure. Her plans were now in jeopardy, and as she stood there, fists clenched, she realized she might have to reconsider her alliances and strategies to succeed in her goal. Lianshu sat in her room, filled with frustration. She couldn't believe that an organization as powerful as the Black Magic Society could fail her in such a crucial mission. She had invested so much time, resources, and her late husband's connections, all for revenge against Lu Sheng. Yet, despite every attempt, he remained resilient, turning her plans against her. Her husband's last words rang in her mind, urging her to leave the past behind. But surrendering wasn't an option she could stomach, not with so much pride on the line. In an attempt to calm herself, she went to her room, hoping that sleep would offer some solace. Laying down, however, she was haunted by memories of past failures. Frustrated thoughts spiraled as she drifted into a troubled sleep. Some later, she awoke with a start, feeling an eerie unease in the room. For a moment, her mind played tricks, making her feel as though she wasn't alone. She glanced at the door, half expecting someone to be there. The tension weighed heavily on her as she remembered her brother lion Jayabai and her lingering guilt over not avenging his past struggles. Trying to shake off the lingering unease, Lianshu called out for water, hoping it might ease her nerves. After a short while, one of her maids entered quietly, carrying a glass on a tray. Lianshu accepted it, hands trembling, and sipped the water, her mind still clouded with thoughts of past regrets and lost opportunities. The maids exchanged glances, concerned but used to these nightly disturbances. They knew Lianshu often wrestled with frustration over her losses. As the moon cast a pale glow through the large window, she looked out at the city, reflecting on her relentless pursuit and wondering if she'd ever find the closure she sought. The night wore on, and her gaze softened, contemplating whether it was time to seek peace rather than vengeance. As the maid approached with a glass of water, Lianshu, lost in thought about her friend, Lion Jayabai, took it without opening her eyes. She murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and began to drink. But moments later, she felt an odd, bitter taste. Startled, she opened her eyes, expecting to see clear water. Yet the glass held a dark, inky substance that seemed to swirl on its own. Panicked, she dropped it to the floor, shattering the glass as the strange liquid spread across the room, pulsing with a faint glow. In the eerie silence that followed, Lion Shu heard a whisper, a voice, distant yet familiar, calling her name. She turned to find Lion Jayabai standing in the doorway, her face shadowed and expression distant. That something was wrong. Jayabai's eyes were blank, her movements slow and robotic, like she was under some kind of spell. "Do you like my gift?" she murmured, her voice hollow. Lion Shu took a step back, realizing that something or someone was controlling her friend. But before she could react, another figure appeared. It was Lion Shu, standing just outside the room, his body surrounded by an ominous green mist. His gaze locked onto Lion Shu, a twisted smile spreading across his face as he raised his hand, and Jayabai's movements mirrored his. With growing terror, Lion Shu understood that Lu Sheng had somehow enchanted her friend to torment her. The room began to shift and distort, blurring her sense of reality. She tried to scream, but her voice was muted by the pressure of the dark magic in the air. Desperately, she looked into Jayabai's eyes, searching for a sign of her friend's true self, but Jayabai's expression remained lifeless. Just as the darkness seemed to consume her, a sudden surge of light shattered the illusion, and the mysterious figure vanished. Lion Shu fell to her knees, exhausted, as she felt a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a monk from a nearby temple who had sensed the disturbance and intervened. With his guidance, she rose, knowing that this encounter was far from over. But now she had allies and the strength to confront Lu Sheng and end his dark influence over those she cared about. Hello guys, welcome back in SL Manhwa. Let's continue. Without making a sound, Liu Sheng entered Lion Su's room. She extended her hand towards him and tried to ask for help, but he began to stare at her and his eyes filled with revenge. This woman had tried to harm him several times and had even endangered his family, so he had no reason to feel pity. And although this method of assassination was cruel, he had no other option. Lion Su, who was lying on the bed, began to run out of air. Foam started coming out of her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. She put one hand on her neck while extending the other, desperately trying to ask for help. Our boy started watching her, and upon seeing that she was suffering, he began to smile and mentioned that he wasn't any saint, just an ordinary person with some sense of justice and a bit of resentment. At that moment, a demonic energy appeared behind Liu Sheng. Upon feeling this energy, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. He knew better than anyone that this was not good. He lowered his head, and his gaze filled with terror, as only a martial saint could give him this sense of death threat. In a matter of seconds, Lion Su began to faint and slowly started to close her eyes. He began to observe her and remembered that he had the ability of premonition, which warned him of possible crises that could affect him or those around him. A level 9 martial saint should have a similar ability, so it was time to change plans. While his body was emitting a blue energy, he began to extend his hand toward Lion Su. He couldn't continue torturing her, as it could attract the attention of the Supreme Martial Saint. If he got trapped here, it would be a big problem. He brought his hand closer to her and clenched his fist tightly, and without an ounce of compassion decided to kill her right then. He began using his power, causing a powerful black energy to appear, which wrapped around Lion Su's neck, slowly suffocating her. Upon feeling this, she regained consciousness and tried to scream, but was unable. With a calm look on his face, our boy decided to withdraw since the warning he felt in his brow had diminished considerably. A short while later, maids arrived with water for her bedside. The lead maid whispered for the others to be quiet, and they tiptoed to the door, peeking inside. What they saw made them scream in horror. "Oh no, Madam is dead." Meanwhile, across the city in a grand estate, a lively banquet filled the brightly lit manor. Guests flowed in, including several grandmasters. 2 young women marveled at the scene, saying they couldn't believe people of such high status were here for Mr. Chen's birthday. It was clear he had serious influence. One friend nodded, adding that Mr. Chen was a grandmaster himself, with connections to all kinds of big names, even a couple of friends in the military who were at the 8th level. The young woman's eyes widened in awe. Meeting an 8th level great grandmaster was unheard of for them, and they whispered excitedly about the chance to catch the attention of a big shot tonight. Ling Su lingered alone by the entrance, listening to the chatter around her. She looked at these so-called elites of society, feeling utterly bored by it all. Just then, a man approached her, offering his hand and suggesting she might be feeling overwhelmed because it was her first event like this, assuring her she'd get used to it. He offered to escort her inside. She politely declined, explaining she was waiting for a friend. He didn't take offense, just looked a bit surprised, remarking that he hadn't known she had a friend here in the capital and would love to meet them later. With that, he headed inside, leaving her with a small sigh of relief. Since her arrival at the Chen family estate, they'd all treated her quite well, especially this man Chen Yi, who was technically her cousin and seemed to go out of his way to look out for her. Still, she couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Her thoughts trailed off as a voice behind her interrupted, asking if she thought he was up to no good, perhaps with some ulterior motive. Instinctively, she nodded, saying that's exactly what she'd been thinking. Then, realizing the voice was familiar, she turned around, surprised to see Liu Sheng approaching with a gentle smile. She blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected him to actually show up. Liu Sheng chuckled, saying he'd promised to come, so of course he'd follow through. Glancing around, he took in their surroundings and thought to himself that it was about 1,000 kilometers from Lion Su's mansion to the Chen family estate, a distance he'd covered in just 5 minutes. Ling Su looked at him, half exasperated, insisting he really didn't need to show up as her backup, and that there was no dramatic, novel-worthy plot unfolding here. As far as she could tell, the Chen family had been welcoming, and even if they felt a bit distant, they seemed genuine in their attempts to make her feel at home. Liu Sheng cut her off with a calm reminder, saying it was her wealth, not her, that they were welcoming. She let out a sigh, knowing he was right. Lowering her head, looking a bit downcast, she muttered, coming back. It always has a cost, doesn't it? Watching Ling Su, Liu Sheng was a bit surprised. With her personality, he'd expected her to push back against the family's pretenses, not settle into them so easily. It was clear he still had a lot to learn about her, but as he thought it over, he began to understand what might be on her mind. She had grown up without much family love. Perhaps in her own way, she longed for even a hint of family warmth, even if it was fake. Though he understood her longing, it didn't mean he agreed with it. Looking at her, he smiled and said, "It doesn't really matter. Tonight, I'll make the right choice for you." Ling Su blinked in confusion, asking what he meant by that. Liu Sheng didn't answer directly. Instead, he glanced at the people milling around, muttering something about finding an unlucky target. Ling Su stared at him, clueless about his plan for the night. Suddenly, Liu Sheng pointed to someone and asked, "Who's that guy?" He was indicating a young man who had just stepped out of a sleek car, a beautiful woman on each arm. The people around instantly recognized him, bowing and greeting him with deep respect, though he barely noticed. She explained that he was the second son of the Zhu family, a powerful clan on the outskirts of the capital with more influence than her own Chen family. Her opinion of him wasn't high. She dismissed him as nothing more than a rich playboy, adding that his older brother was the one people really knew. Before she could continue, Liu Sheng smirked, pointing out that she just said her Chen family. Ling Su paused, realizing that, unconsciously, she'd already begun to see herself as part of the Chen family. Liu Sheng took her hand gently, smiling at her with a warmth that made her blush. He didn't want her getting tied down by things that would hold her back from becoming stronger, and tonight he was here to set things right for her. Before she could process his words, Liu Sheng was already striding toward the Zhu family's second son. People crowded around the young man, each eager to introduce themselves, practically begging for a moment of his attention, growing impatient. He told them all to get lost, just as he thought he'd cleared the crowd. He looked up to see a tall, imposing figure blocking his path, a young man with a cool, unflinching gaze. The young man looked Liu Sheng up and down, noting his impressive build and sharp looks. But what struck him most was the pressure radiating from Liu Sheng's aura, which made it hard for him to even breathe. Instinctively, he pulled the two women closer, using them as shields, and demanded to know who Liu Sheng was. Liu Sheng glanced at the flashy sports car parked behind him and asked if it was his. The young man nodded, smirking, and replied, "And what if it is?" Liu Sheng nodded, while acting super impressed, said it was a nice car, but wanted to know just how much it set him back. Realizing this was about status, the young man chuckled, pride taking over as he said, "This baby cost him over 80 million. And it's a limited edition, probably the only one in the country." Liu Sheng acted even more impressed, walking over to run his hand over the car's sleek surface. The young man scoffed, muttering something about country bumpkins. But in the next second, Liu Sheng's tone turned cold, "Nice car." But before anyone could react, an overwhelming force radiated from Liu Sheng. In an instant, the car was flattened, crushed under his aura like a tin can. The young man froze and then let out a horrified scream. "My car!" Liu Sheng stuffed his hands into his pockets, giving the young man a satisfied smile while saying, "That's much better." The young man, his face twisted with rage and fear, glared at him. "Hey, bro, what's this all about?" Liu Sheng shot him a sharp look, the chilling energy rolling off him, making the young man stumble back in panic. It was then that he learned about Liu Sheng's name, who's also a friend of someone named Ling Su. Liu Sheng told him that if he had any problems, he could come find him anytime. As if obviously looking for drama, he then pointed to the crowd where Ling Su stood and said, "That's the person he's talking about." Everyone turned to look at her. Meanwhile, Ling Su herself was completely confused and pointed to herself, wondering why she was suddenly the center of attention. Zio's luxury car, which had been crushed by Liu Sheng, was now engulfed in flames. Poor Zio put his hands on his head and started screaming in panic, while on the other hand, our boy was watching silently. Everything was going as per his plan. Yilingsu's eyes were filled with confusion, which made him sweat. He had no idea how to explain it or why Liu Sheng was behaving this way. Zio fell to the ground on his knees and started crying. Yilingsu, who was standing behind Zio, saw him and panic spread on her face as she knew this was not good. Now that the situation had escalated, Liu Sheng closed his eyes, began to hit Zio with one hand and smiled and apologized to Zio and told him that he could not control his feeling of jealousy. Obviously, this angered Zio. He turned his head towards them, and while his body was trembling and his face was full of tears, with an expression full of vengeance and anger, he remembered the names of Yilingsu and Liu Sheng, swore so that they would pay the price in the future. Yilingsu started pointing her finger at herself and asked with a confused expression why she was getting involved if she had nothing to do with it. Before she could continue talking, Liu Sheng gently placed his hand on her hip, closed his eyes, started walking towards the mansion, and with a confident smile told her not to pay attention to Zio. Yilingsu placed her hand on her chest and she became nervous and started sweating a lot. While poor Zio was kneeling on the ground mourning the loss of her luxury car, Liu Sheng and Yilingsu started walking towards the entrance of the mansion. A white-haired man present at the scene turned to look at them, his gaze filled with fear. He didn't know who Liu Sheng and Yilingsu were or how they dared to provoke the second young master of the Zhu family. According to him, Liu Sheng was an imposing figure who left people wanting more. After a while, Liu Sheng and Yilingsu entered the mansion, which was very luxurious and filled with important people. Now that they were inside, Yelingsu, who was somewhat upset, put her hand on Liu Shang's chest and pushed him and asked with a serious expression what he was trying to do. Liu Shang remained calm, staring at him and thinking quietly. He knew that if he didn't persuade him, things would go wrong. Yelingsu got angry, and with an angry look she reminded him that he just ruined Xiu's car and verbally provoked her, and for no reason he even got her involved, causing her to get into trouble. Our man didn't lose his composure, sighed, smiled, and calmly said that it didn't matter because he just wanted to help her. Questions started to arise in Yelingsu's mind. She put her hands on his waist, stared at him, and asked why he wanted to help her and what he did to defend her, asking him to at least give her a reason. Liu Shang started to look at her with a smile. After several seconds he put his hand under his chin, looked away, and started to think of a reason. This made Yelingsu even angrier, but she was surprised when Liu Shang started to imagine that Zhao was catching up with her at night to have some fun. Our boy walked up to her, started pointing his finger at her, and explained with a confident expression that Jiu is not just a playboy. Today she was dressed very sexy and beautiful, so she was definitely going to attract the attention of that boy who had malicious intentions and would do anything to get her. Yelingsu's gaze was full of fear and confusion, and before she could think of anything, Liu Shang gently placed his hand on her head. Then he walked up to her, looked into her eyes, and mentioned with a kind smile that this is what is always said in novels. He was doing this to prevent a disaster, and he also said that there was no need to thank him. Upon hearing this, she became even more confused than before and answered yes with a lost look. The innocent Yelingsu believed Liu Shang. He showed her a thumbs up, started looking at her, and praised our boy in a serious way, saying that he is incredible. Some beautiful tables were set up in the main hall of the palace for the guests to eat. The party was about to start, and all the guests, some rich men, others powerful and very famous, entered one after another. One of them was a man wearing earrings. It was Zuo who had a sharp eye. He quietly observed Liu Shang. While Liu Shang and Yelingsu were happily chatting with each other, his cousin Chenri appeared. He looked at Liu Shang and couldn't help but smile because he had been looking for them for a long time. In the blink of an eye, the room was filled with people. Chenri walked up to them, closed his eyes, and greeted Yelingsu with a smile. Hearing her voice, they stopped talking and focused their attention on her. Chenri walked up to them, stared at our boy, extended his hand to her, and smiled and asked Yelingsu if she wasn't going to introduce her friend. He had heard that after coming, our boy had smashed Zhuo's car and even blamed the Chen family. He was really impressed. Liu Shang did not lose his composure, looked at him calmly, and wondered who this boy was. Yelingsu started sweating and thought indecisively. She didn't know what to say about it. Liu Shang closed his eyes, put his hand on his mouth, asked her to stop praising him with another, and smiled and thought that his way of speaking was very interesting. Seeing Liu Shang's attitude, Chenyi's gaze was filled with confusion. He stared at him and wondered why he was laughing. Liu Shang opened his eyes, and as a dark aura emanated from his body, he stared at Chenyi and asked if he was hinting at something. As he sensed Liu Shang's aura, Chenyi couldn't help but feel a chill throughout his body. He realized that he was no ordinary person. Chenyi became alert, and with a confused expression, he distanced himself from them. He was nervous as he didn't know what was going on. Seeing this, Yelingsu, who was standing next to Liu Shang, became somewhat confused. Poor Chenyi's face was filled with fear. He looked at the ground, which made him sweat profusely. He was a respectable level 6 warrior, but he couldn't stand even one look from Liu Shang. He took several steps back, looking at Liu Shang with a panicked expression, and his body trembled as he realized that he was an outstanding student of the 7th Martial Academy, a rare talent in martial arts who hoped to become a master. Chen Yui decided not to give in to Liu Shang's pressure and intimidation by saying that the Chen family had ties to a great level 8 master. Liu Shang started to look at Chen Yui and kept quiet. A great level 8 master was nothing compared to him. Chen Yui realized that it was not a good idea to mess with Liu Shang, so without hesitating for a second, he turned his back on him and started running away from the area, sweating like crazy as he swore that Liu Shang would regret what he had done today. Chen Yui thought he was out of danger now, but once he looked down, his eyes filled with fear. He didn't know why he couldn't continue running. Suddenly, Chen Yui's body began to float in the air. He tried to move but couldn't. He didn't know why his body was floating or who was responsible for it. It was obviously Liu Shang. He stretched his hand upward and activated his psychic power, causing Chen Yui's body to float in the air. He mocked him and asked where he expected to run to. Chen Yui panicked upon realizing that Liu Shang was behind this. He began to sweat even more and tried to ask He Lingshu for help. He and the others stared at him and were stunned. A strong aura emanated from Liu Shang's body, and with a sharp look, he asked Chen Yui if he was hinting at something and why he was talking nonsense. Just before Liu Shang could do anything, He Lingshu came up to him, clenched his fist tightly, and with an angry expression ordered him to put Chen Yui down and not cause any more trouble. With a calm look, Liu Shang started to look at her and was silent for several seconds. Then he closed his eyes and decided to listen to her. He turned his head back and used his finger to throw Chen Yi's body aside and smiled and said that He Lingshu's wishes were orders to him. When she realized that Liu Shang had thrown her into the banquet hall, she panicked. Chen Yi's body was thrown and hit the table where the banquet was, causing everything on the table to fly away. Due to the strong impact, in a matter of seconds, he opened his mouth and fainted. Hearing the sound of the collision, all the guests rushed over to see what was happening and panicked when they saw her unconscious. He Lingshu's gaze filled with fear. She felt that everything was over. She lost her composure, put her hands on her face, and her eyes filled with despair. All the hard work she had done over the years had all been wasted. At that moment, someone told the others to move aside because the second son of the Zuo family was going to do the deed. Hearing this, He Lingshu and Liu Shang's attention shifted to one side. Both were somewhat surprised because they didn't know what was going on. A bunch of angry guards appeared, and in front was the second son of the Zuo family, who clenched his fists and got angry thinking that they were making trouble. He started pointing at Liu Shang with his finger and said with an angry look that he was the culprit. He started staring at our boy and said that he is an arrogant scoundrel who knows nothing about life, asking if he really believes that just because he won first place in the national tournament and has some talent, he is someone important. Liu Shang started staring at Zhuo and kept quiet, while on the other side, He Lingshu put her hands on her chest and her gaze was filled with fear, thinking that this was not good. With a smug look, Zhuo mentioned that the only thing he did was fall into Liu Shang's trap, calling him a little coward and telling him to be ready to die. Zhuo's gaze shifted towards the beautiful He Lingshu. He stuck out his tongue and told her to wait until he is finished with Liu Shang, because after that she will see how he is going to treat her. Hearing this, she felt a chill and with a nervous expression thought that this was not good at all, while on the other side, our boy crossed his arms and started smiling. Zhuo remembered that He Lingshu was the adopted daughter of the Chen family, and if the Chen family was not interested in her industry, Liu Shang definitely would not have the right to attend the banquet. Before the situation could get any worse, someone in the crowd raised their hand and called out to He Lingshu. She was distracted and somewhat confused. Mother He Lingshu, who was wearing a beautiful dress, stepped forward and angrily asked where she found these friends and if she was going to kick Liu Shang out of here, mentioning that she should kick her out immediately if she wanted to return to the Chen family. Mother held He Lingshu's hand tightly and the two started walking away from the noise. The woman turned back and with a sincere look asked her to come with her because later they were going to apologize to the second son of the Zhuo family to clear up the misunderstanding. He Lingshu, who was somewhat unsure, started thinking about what to do now, and before she could make a decision, Liu Shang caught her attention and said with a confident smile that he had already told her. It was just like in novels. She was a prototypical heroine. She would arrive at such events and become everyone's target. Everyone would attack and torture her. Finally, a villain would come to save her. Hearing Liu Shang's voice, she turned her head back, while on the other side, the mother became angry and started cursing at her. Liu Shang moved very quickly and made He Lingshu disappear, leaving the mother somewhat confused and frightened. He rescued her from her mother's clutches, put his hand on her shoulder, closed his eyes and said with a smile that she would no longer need any villain to save her because he had her. He Lingshu's gaze was filled with anger, asked him what he was doing, and told him that it was his fault. The mother lost her composure and got angry. With her eyes full of anger, she asked He Lingshu to listen to her mother, ordering her to break all contact with him and come with him, promising that the family would protect her and forgive this mistake. Instead of looking at her mother in uncertainty, He Lingshu began observing Liu Shang, and far from taking the Chang family's side, she stood firm and apologized to Mrs. Chen with determination, explaining that she could not accept the terms they offered. The mother did not expect this. She became angry, started pointing her finger at them, calling He Lingshu a pervert and ordered the guards to catch them both. Liu Shang hugged her and calmly told her not to worry as he would not regret this decision, saying that what happened now was the most exciting part, revealing that it was time to teach them a good lesson. Being so close to Liu Shang made He Lingshu blush like a tomato. She couldn't believe he was doing all this for her. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.